Good morning, folks. Welcome to BCCIE's virtual forum, The Impacts of COVID-19 and Next Steps for the Private Post-Secondary and Languages Sector in British Columbia. My name is Randall Martin, Executive Director of the BC Council for International Education, and I will be today's moderator. I thank you for joining us in what I trust will be an insightful discussion on pertinent and pressing topics facing BC's private institutions and language schools as we navigate the COVID-19 crisis and focus on taking stock, moving forward, and recovery in the coming months. Today's event evolved from a recent survey BCCIE conducted with stakeholders in the international education sector, undertaken to better understand how the pandemic has impacted planning and operations as they relate to international students. I hope today further contextualizes our findings. Before we get started, it is important that I acknowledge that we at BCCIE live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So on to a couple of housekeeping items first. Attendees will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to submit a question to our panelists during the broadcast, please type them into the question box in the control panel, and we'll try to get to these at the end of the discussion. If you require technical assistance during the webinar, please also use the question box, and our communications team will help answer your inquiry. We are very fortunate today to have a very strong group of panelists with years of experience in the international education arena, working from different positions and bringing different perspectives to the conversation. I would like to welcome our panelists and ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, their names, titles, schools, and associations. Let's start with you, Sharon, and go from there.
Thanks, Randall. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks to BCCIE for organizing this session at this critical time. My name is Sharon Curl. I'm the Managing Director of North America for Oxford International Education Group. I'm also a board and executive committee member of Languages Canada, and currently sitting in the position of immediate past president.
Great, thank you. Darren.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Darren Hancock. I'm the chair of the Private Degree Granting Institutions Association of BC, representing 17 universities and colleges, and vice president academic and campus provost of Yorkville University in British Columbia. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks, Randall, for organizing this.
Thank you.
Hi, Darren. Thank you for everyone being here today. My name is Feroz Ali. I'm the president of ALEC Higher Education, which is a new part of the ALEC business. Traditionally, ALEC is an education, English education school. I'm also the board member of BCCIE, representing EQA providers here in British Columbia.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to briefly provide some context to the conversation and to the sector before we begin our discussion. International education is an important part of BC's education ecosystem in terms of diversifying our classrooms and communities, offering intercultural experience, opportunity, and growth to our own students, and inviting students from around the world into our classrooms and communities. It is at once both a social good and an important economic generator for our districts and institutions and schools. Canada and BC have been enjoying rapid, and some might say unsustainable, growth for over a decade, while many other competitor countries stubbed their toes or fell briefly out of favor with key markets. We in Canada are one of the most desirable destinations in the world, and BC, one of the most desirable destinations within Canada. Per capita, BC has the most international students in Canada. But also in Canada, we are notoriously lax at keeping up to date and relevant statistics. The best information we have is that in December of 2019, we had over 640,000 international students in Canada, a 160% increase over 10 years, contributing well over $20 billion to the Canadian economy and schools. In BC, we have over 160,000 international students, with over 80,000 or 50% of them in private sector institutions in the language sector. There are in excess of 30,000 jobs in BC directly tied to international education, supported primarily by the revenue stream from international students. And international education makes a contribution well north of $5 billion annually to the province. Now, people have long warned us Remember not to rely too much on the income that international students generate. It can disappear. Remember SARS, remember H1N1, remember the currency crisis, mad cow disease. Remember not to put all of your eggs in one basket. Diversify. Remember that nothing lasts forever, and as George Harrison reminded us, all things must pass. Well, they must. This pandemic has certainly captured our attention, and I think it is safe to say that we are all listening now. So I'd like to begin by asking our panelists to provide a brief overview of their institutions or schools' experience navigating COVID-19 and any best practices learned while developing their response to the pandemic. So Sharon, I might ask you to begin if that's all right.
Right, thanks, Randall. Well, I've been involved in international education and operating my own school here in British Columbia for over 30 years. I was the owner operator of the school during all those challenges Randall just mentioned. And also, some other integral things like changes to immigration policy, losing the co-op programs for language schools, change in visa processes that also had a huge impact on our business. From each of these experiences, we've learned to adapt and adjust, though I must say nothing prepared us for this one. I'd saved the action list when after SARS, I thought we'd been through it all. I'd saved the action list, so if anything like this were to happen again, we pulled that out. It did enable us to take steps immediately, whereas during SARS, it took us a couple of weeks to start reacting. But it's just so different. And at the time of SARS, we were a very young school, and we were able to survive. And then I think an important thing that we knew and are keeping in mind now is that once it ended, and it did end, we thrived and did very well. There was a decrease. There were some schools that were lost at that time. Although this is, a different magnitude, we've taken very similar mitigation activities with COVID. In our organization, we've focused on four major areas. First and foremost is safeguarding staff and students, ensuring their health and well-being. This included launching an online learning platform, basically at the flick of a switch, as we really received a day's notice in having to get our students out of our Toronto school. In Vancouver, we had a little bit more time, but again, it was just instantly where we had to teach classroom teachers who had never taught online, training them to teach online, figuring out which software to use. It also switched, as everybody in the province has, to working from home. In this industry, it's a very collaborative and interactive environment, so it was a completely different way for us to run our business. Our mantra has been cash is king. We have to, ultimately we knew that when this started, the money that was in the bank is probably the money that was all we were going to have to be able to ride this out. So we're looking at different ways that we can survive with deferrals, rent relief, government programs, just to ensure that we're going to be able to survive as long as this lasts. We created, one of the biggest things was creating value-added options for existing bookings to maintain enrollments and encourage students to postpone to come at a later date. It's actually been very effective and been really helpful. But it's also involved some very tough decisions, forcing us to lay off staff and trim expenses across the operation. We're looking at all types of government support initiatives that are available for the crisis. For our organization, I sold my shares several years ago, which means that we are now a foreign controlled company. And even though we employ Canadians, all taxes, actually more taxes, because we're foreign controlled, we've not been eligible for most of the relief measures so far, which has made it even more difficult. And kind of the fourth area that we've is looking at innovation, new revenue opportunities. What can we do that will give us the ability? So this includes our new virtual online products, selling it overseas, and looking at things that we can do moving ahead again, so that we're not relying just on the cash that's in the bank today to keep us going. So those are the main things that we've been doing at Oxford International.
Oh, thank you very much. That's comprehensive. Love to have an offline chat about the value added and the innovation. Sounds very interesting. Darren, what's your experience at Yorkville?
Well, the good news is we're still growing. So even though the pandemic is potentially taking a toll, we anticipated the potential drop in enrollments in the future. So we focused on starting online in the term that we started in April. And so the good news, I don't know who started in April, who's starting in May, who's starting in June or July, but we have enrollments 4 times a year for most of our programs. And so we prepared for this. As Sharon said, 1 day's notice, 2 days notice is not a lot, but we're kind of nimble. So we started as an online school in 2003. So our biggest programs are thousands of students online across the country, some international, but the biggest impact might be the future in international on campus in Vancouver and Toronto. So we're not quite sure exactly, but what we've done, and I'll try not to repeat the wonderful things that Sharon talked about, is to ensure that our faculty are equally trained and equally comfortable in online modality, a blended modality, and face-to-face, because we think this new normal is going to be with us for a while, regardless of when the pandemic is over. We've started to have webinars with our agents. The last one we attended, we had 700, and we're trying to convince agents that the new normal is not doing what you've always done, because sometimes the agents are resistant to change, not just the students or the institutions themselves. So there's an education that has to happen throughout the whole system. The other thing on a smaller scale that I'm seeing that we're doing a better job of is communicating. Lots of times in organizations, at least bigger ones like ours, there's silos between departments. And quite frankly, I'm delighted that they're being broken down. Everybody is realizing that you have to be better at this. What you've done in the past does not work all that well anymore. And so we've started to professionalize student services. That's just as important as marketing and recruitment. We've started to extend hours for IT almost 24/7. Usually it was whenever the students were on campus. So I don't know, 9 to 9 or 8 to 8 or whatever people operate as. And now it's 24/7 with drop-in sessions. And everybody is so happy because they're getting their questions answered without having to book an appointment, do a ticket, or wait for someone to get back to them. So quite frankly, we are amazed that there's a lot more receptivity from the whole system, every staff, every faculty, every department, and even the students. So I'm getting more engagement now than I did before. And I hope that as the pandemic recedes, that not only will this be part of the new normal, which we have to define, it'll be more beneficial to our growth moving forward, because the technology is available. We just have to adopt it. And hopefully the more we adopt, the less expensive it becomes. So there's some good things happening, and I hope that we can continue with the best practices that we're seeing.
Great, thank you, Darren. And Feroz, maybe you could talk about ILAC. And I know this is you've been in this new capacity for just a few months, but you're also representing on the board the broader EQA sector. So I wonder if you could reference that of both ILAC's experience as well as what you've seen in other sort of EQA schools.
Well, I think before we start, I'd like to acknowledge all the first responders and essential workers. You know, they've been keeping us safe and protecting our family and friends. So a big shout out for everyone out there. I think for ILAC, I'm originally from New Zealand, and you know, been here in Canada for 4 years. And in January, we sold 2 of our private colleges to ILAC and formed a new division called ILAC Higher Education. And what's really interesting is that ILAC, being one of the, as Sharon would confirm, one of the larger language providers and pathway providers here in Canada, us pivoting to sort of the vocational higher education piece, you know, was almost a blessing in disguise, because one of the schools that was purchased was actually delivering online education using Canvas as a tool, and that was one of a CTC in Sterling. And what's really interesting is, you know, everyone's become a wizard at Zoom and Teams and everything like that. But as Darren was saying, you know, the trickery of technology has made us experts and able to break down barriers and structures so that we can engage with students and staff really in a much more flatline structure. For ILAC, it's been an interesting journey. You know, we have quite a diverse structure in terms of we've got a fantastic partner as a shareholder, which is ONCAP. And that gives us certainty going forward as a group, knowing there's liquidity and you know, we can weather the storm, whether it's 12, 18 or 24 months, you know, we're in good stead. What's really interesting is how the team has come together, and I'll start with from an administrator all the way to our director, international and offshore. We're still seeing very strong bookings. Well, you know, I think last stats I saw was we had 4,000 weeks booked for the month of April, or something similar like that. We had 250 plus pathway starts coming up in April, where students are actually going into public colleges across Canada. And so a lot of that stuff shows that, you know, people are resilient and focused in making sure that we preserve this industry, we preserve each other's roles, and we behave like, you know, it's an academic term that Darren will probably appreciate, but behave like a true community of practice, both internally and externally. One of the lessons we've learned is that we are very dependent on face-to-face and bricks and mortar delivery. And you know, ILEC launched a fantastic new initiative called ILEC KISS, where, you know, we've reached students globally. Right now, we have close to 2,000 students currently engaged with us at ILEC, both studying onshore and offshore. And we are running 6 different streams. So if you're in Vietnam, you could do a BC 6 to 9 slot, which is their morning. And so there is so many different combinations that and innovations that we may have been able to come up. But you know, what I really say is that I think I feel for our friends in the sector, because I see more schools collapsing. A few of them have been temporarily propped up by this Canadian wage subsidy and other deferrals program. But in reality, that will run out in July. And so, you know, the implications of what the sector looks like, whether it's English or post-secondary or vocational, and this is globally. I mean, I run schools in New Zealand and in Asia and UK, and you know, this is not going to go away very quickly, but it's certainly going to give us some great lessons on what not to do going forward. Less dependent on classrooms, you know, reduce the carbon footprint of why do we bring so many people into our campuses and crowd them. So it'll be nice to get back to what the normal was, but the normal will be a new normal, not the old normal.
Great, thank you for Sharon. I mean, we've watched and the language sector seems to be hit particularly hard by this pandemic, and especially as people anticipate what I understand are the very busy summer months, and so the timing couldn't have been worse on many fronts. But as we look towards some kind of possibly hybrid reopening of the post-secondary sector in September, what is Oxford doing? More broadly, what is the language sector doing to anticipate that? And do you have a sense of what you know, numbers might look like in September?
Yeah, yes, indeed, Randall. We've been crushed by this pandemic. It's as Feroz mentioned, there's schools that have closed and will be closing. I just learned this week that one of the longest standing language schools in BC has announced it will close its doors in June. It's and it's heartbreaking when you hear this news, because we know these people and we've seen that they run really good operations. I was just on a call this morning with owners of schools across Canada and the US, and most of them on the call were reporting that their numbers for summer are going to be anywhere from 10 to 20% of what it normally is for a summer, and that's the make or break time for the sector. So losing the summer is really difficult. Most schools are looking at their reopening strategy and closely watching as the phasing plans are announced by the provincial governments. Right now, my school is reopening looking at probably reopening in June. If we can make sure that we address all the safeguarding needs. And that's going to be a blended learning where there's an online component, a face-to-face component, and not more than 50 people in the school at one time. So it's going to be a very painful way to do it, staggering classes, staggering arrival times. We have to take a look at extra sanitization, transportation, so people are coming in at different times, and a lot of work that's going to need to be done on that. And really, that's just going to be for the students who are already in Canada, which our numbers are, I think, about 30% of what they were in March at this point in time, and way off where we're supposed to be for summer. I think as a sector, private language schools are worried. How are we going to be able to recruit enough students under the new normal? Are people going to want to come and be self-isolated for 2 weeks and then take their courses? Numbers for September, talking to other schools, looking at our own numbers, they do not look very good. We're seeing some bookings come in, and as I mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of postponements, but people are. We're not sure if they're going to be willing to do that. As it stands right now, we still have to pay. We still have to pay our rent in all locations and other fixed costs, which is going to be hard to do on a long-term basis. The wage subsidy, as Feroz mentioned, it has been helpful, and it's actually propping some schools up right now. There's also a rent subsidy program which is helping some schools, but it only works for schools that have a certain amount of rent. So it's actually for most of the larger schools that they're not able to apply for that. One of our schools, in our organization, would be able to apply for it if the landlord agrees. Languages Canada has been extremely active with advocacy for members since the onset of the pandemic. And most of the work of Languages Canada has switched to be working for the private sector members because they're the ones that have that are the most danger at this particular time. So really the association's been helping advocate for subsidies, support for fixed costs, leading mailing campaigns, looking at what things we can do with our MPs, MLAs to try and get the voice heard, and making sure that the importance of the language sector to the international education strategy and economy is understood. So despite things that are happening, our numbers look very bleak for September. With in my school, we just have a small number of the bookings for September that we would normally have at this time. We're hopeful with the changes that are coming out that we'll see people booking, and we're going to try and make that 2-week period as exciting as possible. So long-term students will be interesting, and keep in mind, in the language sector, a long-term student is a 12-week or a 24-week student, and that all those students who have postponed are going to come back with this in this environment. So it doesn't look very good. So the language sector is going to need a lot of help in the coming period until things come back.
Well, thank you, Sharon. I'm very, very sorry for what the sector is going through. I know it's been a huge contributor to the broader international education ecosystem, and I'm sure all of the other divisions within international education will work towards building more pathways and strengthening your sector. Feroz and Darren, similar trends and experiences in the sort of EQA and in the private degree granting area? Oh, Feroz, you're muted.
Sorry. See, I'm not an expert. The vocational English market is probably impacted the most, in my view, at present, because the inability to travel, etc. However, I think there may be something to look forward to going forward, as you know, the traditional English schools and the EQA schools that can deliver diplomas and do co-ops and etc. I think there may be a, you know, we always try to look for a silver lining in the crisis kind of scenario, and the ability to now think outside your core business is perhaps allowing a lot of schools to look and saying, how do we pivot our business? You know, do we continue just doing English, or do we continue just doing X? And so I think people are checking in. You know, to Sharon's point earlier, you know, losing one of the most long-standing schools here in British Columbia, in Vancouver, a language partner, you know, it's a shock, because it's not just affecting the language sector, it's the flow through to Yorkville University, UBC, SFU, and all the public colleges. So this is going to have a supply chain effect over the next 3 to 5 years, in my view.
From the private sector, I think, at least on the degree side, you're going to see declining enrollments. But what I'm hoping, Randall, that the message we want to send, and I thank the ministry and you for attending our actually weekly calls that we're having right now, is to try to come together and put forth solutions, because we are a solution to this problem. We do, to Faraz's point, have to pivot. Otherwise, we're just going to have to wait twiddling our thumbs till this pandemic takes its toll, and that's not an outcome that we want to see. And we have to work together. So I think what I'm hearing from the sector is that we want to know if we can offer online before the students come. So what we did as an institution is we had hundreds of students that were being advised by the agents, and half of the agents were saying, no, wait it out. This will be over in, I don't know what we're saying, 2 months. And we're thinking, no, this is not true. And there might be another outbreak. So please pivot your business. Stop telling people that they should wait. So we started with a small group of several hundred students, and what we did was an orientation every day for 2 weeks because of time zones and time differences. And students were a little bit scared at first, because when they come to Canada, there's one orientation everybody must attend, and it's longer. We said, well, we can't do that. You can't have a 1-day orientation online. So we did about 14 of them. And quite frankly, some people came back 5 or 6 times, and they're more adjusted now than if they came to Canada going through culture shock and all the things that they do in the first couple of months. So it looks like, I'm knocking on wood here, I don't know if you can see it, you can probably hear it, I'm knocking on wood, that this is changing the way we do business, even for orientations, tech support, and student services. And it looks like our retention is even higher now than it was previous. And we're actually 49% higher this year, July to July, basically is what we're looking at, the numbers. So I'm hoping that what we're doing is probably what a lot of the industry might end up doing. And if we work together and share best practices, which I'd like to advocate actually, we're all for it. So I won't say any more than that to see what other people are thinking, but I think we just need to raise the bar and work together, because as Faraz said, this is a flow through. What hurts the sector, period.
Great. Thank you all. Darren, that's a nice segue, your orientation anecdote there, to the next question I wanted to ask about the ease of overnight transition to virtual delivery. Were there gaps? Could there have been places that you could have had more support? And my recollection of a previous conversation was you actually found that it wasn't as difficult as you had originally anticipated, or that might be my faulty memory.
No, what we did was we had, this is going to sound crazy to everybody, but we knew this was going to be an issue if we didn't jump on it. So we trained 650 faculty, 3,000 students, and about 500 administrators in 3 weeks. And so that involved 212 webinars from March the 3rd. And they were starting at 7 in the morning and going to 7 at night because of the time difference. We operate in Vancouver, Toronto, and obviously New Brunswick on the East Coast. So a big 4.5-hour time difference, or 4 hours actually. And so we were practicing. And so even though it was a little stressful, everybody talks about Zoom fatigue. You've got to be at your best behavior, and you can't take a break because there's always asking questions, and it's kind of like the real classroom. It's yes, it's technology, but you're on your best behavior and you're focused. So The first week was a little difficult, I have to say. The second week, it was a little better. The third week was above normal, and we're into the fourth week now of a term, and it looks like better than before. So I'd like to suggest that if you get your IT people and your faculty involved early and start training people and get rid of the fear of this technology, the students that are coming, especially in the language sector, because they're very young, some of them are early teens or mid-teens or later teens, if that's the audience, they seem to have fun with this technology. It's the older people that are not so happy about it. So we've got to break down that resistance. And I know we're all getting better at pushing buttons, but it's the new way of doing business, and hybrid model is here to stay. I've been doing it since 1995. And when it was a bad thing, technology and online learning was a bad thing. Try doing this dial-up. We would have a disaster on our hands. Right now, I think we can make this work. So we just have to work together.
Rose?
Yeah, look, I totally concur with Darren, and it's interesting. One of the advantages of pivoting to virtual delivery online is that you're able to reach actually a far bigger audience. But there is a misnomer that virtual delivery is a lower cost of delivery than face-to-face. It's not. It's actually far more expensive to do this online than unless you get massive scale and economies of scale working, but we're not there yet. One of the interesting things for us is we pivoted from Teams to Zoom to for the English piece, but for the vocational, the EQA piece, the colleges, we stayed consistent with Canvas, and now as a group we embracing Canvas. In fact, we just signed a fantastic deal with them, which allows us connectivity. But it really dawned to us that we engage with students face to face a lot, and we need to give them an LMS that actually gives them a one-stop shop where they can source all kinds of information, where there's pastoral care information on how to navigate, not just on COVID-19, but while they are international students in Canada. And pastoral care does not necessarily mean just on social. Academic pastoral care is also important. Darren touched on that around student services. But we feel going forward that whether it's the group or the sector, we do need to embrace each other as one and share best practice. I see a lot more public-private, private-private collaborations going forward. And that is for one particular reason, survival. If we don't do that, we will decimate this industry. And there is a lot of lessons that we can learn from abroad, Randall. I think, Canada should be aggressive in terms of embracing a 14-day mandatory quarantining, giving certainty to students who are looking at coming to Canada, saying, if you choose to come to Canada, 14 days mandatory, then you're free to engage in a social distance manner. The other thing that I think we should be cognizant of is that the cost of delivery when we re-enter and start doing anything is also going to shoot up. So how many will fail in the next 6 months is yet to be seen, because I see, Sharon was mentioning no more than 50 students in a campus. We have campuses with thousands of students. How do we break them up into groups of 50? I think we'll run out of weeks and months to even deliver to one cohort. So technology will play a key part going forward.
Okay, great. I've got a couple of questions I'd like to amalgamate here in terms of moving forward and looking at new models of recruitment. Obviously, everybody's altering their plans for student recruitment, virtual models, virtual platforms, niche and boutique markets. I know an increasing number of institutions and groups are hiring people in country, which hadn't been done before. And in addition to that, I mean, every crisis brings an opportunity. And one of the things we've been talking about for years is the need for diversity. Well, this is an opportunity for instant diversity in terms of we've been reliant, depending on the sector, for on two main countries, China and India, for recent years. And what we gleaned from our survey was interest in exploring a lot of new markets in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, Russia, Ukraine, parts of Eastern and Central Europe, South Asia, more than in terms of Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, places where we haven't put a lot of emphasis yet. So it's sort of a wide-ranging question here, but in terms of new platforms for recruitment, new models of recruitment, and new markets for recruitment, I'm wondering how you each might answer that in terms of the direction you're going.
Well, if I can go first, it's remarkable. We have close to 15,000 students through our group as a throughput in a good year without COVID, and Indian and Chinese students equate to less than 1% of our total cohort. And so when we talk about diversity and engagement with students offshore, that's been one of our strong pillars in our group at ILAC. And we've been doing some innovative stuff. We have a forum called Canadian Partnership Forum, which and a lot of public colleges are part of. And the level of engagement and the virtual fairs we're doing has been very great, very good in terms of engagement. Mike Hanniger, who used to work for ISAF, if you talk to him, I call him the guru at international marketing and promotion. He knows those markets better than anyone of us. We have to innovate on how we interact with the students and the agents. We also have to, be nimble on how we transition the students from offshore to onshore. And, does international education in Canada is going to remain as onshore only, or is it now going to challenge schools like Yorkville and ILAC and the higher education schools to go offshore now, set up a collaboration agreement? Because virtual delivery has taught us one thing: there are no boundaries. There is no, provided the legislators, regulators give us the blessings to do this offshore, there is absolutely no limit on how we can package Canadian education and ease the burden of debt that a lot of our students incur by coming to Canada, by having them start a year program in India, Brazil, Mexico, Vietnam. And then, so I think this is the kind of innovation, and, Apply Board, IDP, and all the various agencies, people like Mike, if we talk to these experts, we will learn on how and when to engage with certain markets. I would not recommend people going and setting up shops everywhere. That's why I think collaboration probably is a better way of approaching this. Darren?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Faraz said. We actually started it before the pandemic, but I guess because India and China were so supportive of all the things that were happening here, and there's lots of collaboration from that side, it was kind of easier to do. So the other markets were smaller and more challenging and more dispersed. But I think, Randall, you're right. I think this is just going to speed up the process. And to Faraz's point, if people lose their jobs, and a lot of people losing their jobs in those countries in Canada are people that don't have degrees, and they've got to start with language, then they've got to start with a diploma, then they've got to ladder into a degree. We're all going to be dealing with the same issues. So I think it's important to diversify, and we must get better at that. So we're signing partnerships with institutions, with agents, and actually what I like about what we're doing, instead of having staff run off their heads because they got 300 people to try to meet in a 3-day period in one country and in another one, or 5 different cities, we're doing one-on-one appointments and working around the student's schedule, which is amazing, because you could have a student and they've got the parents there with them, or whoever their trusted advisors are, and it seems to be a lot more informative for the people that are making those decisions to send the students to Canada, or maybe not, maybe stay at home because money is tight or the exchange rate's bad, and save that money knowing you still have a pathway when you come to Canada. So to go back to another point that either Sharon or Faraz made, we should be working together on pathways, public and private, private and private, public and public, to recognize each other's work so that students, regardless of where they are, have pathways to come when that time is right.
Thank you.
Yeah, fully agree, because I think that's the way forward. What we're seeing from a language sector is there's a lot of markets where for language only we could not get visas. So they're markets that weren't traditional to us that we're now looking into, that we can open up and actually offer our online courses as part of the pathway offering that we have with our different partners. So we're seeing some opportunity there that was not there before, and we're looking at, and many of our partners already have indicated that they will accept our course delivered online. So we're now putting that together. I think one of the challenges we had is when we first developed our online platform, we had looked at it as a short-term measure, and we're now kind of revamping that to be a long-term offering, and being able to really fit as an integral part of our pathway program. And I think from in speaking to other language schools, I think that's kind of the direction that people are going. And as I said earlier, it's going to be innovation and nimbleness that's going to enable the schools to survive this situation.
Thanks. Now, one of the things that may hamper, again, recovery and the innovation in the fall is the possible inability of students to even arrive in Canada. That you've admitted them, they can't get their biometrics or for some other reason, and it's still not 100% clear what of the institution's ability to offer online programming if a student is going to be staying overseas. I'm just wondering how you're going to mitigate some of these issues in terms of students not even able to arrive for a quarantine period. Darren,
yeah, I think realistically we will be, when you talk to the larger agencies, Apply Board is one of them. They are predicting that winter 2021, January 2021, which is a long time away, is when physically we'll see some mobility of students into Canada. Randall, to your remarks around, are we, all four of us, if we have young kids, we're very protective of them here in Canada and BC right now, that we wouldn't just let them roam around Kitsilano Beach or something, because we want to protect them. And so this is a very, very interesting area where I think the decision to travel, we're all travel junkies, and the decision to travel while there is no vaccine is going to have it's going to be a very, very hard decision for parents and people to make. Things like mandatory quarantining and, Immigration Canada relaxing the ability to study up to a year program at home, and then feeling comfortable to come to Canada. They have to extend it beyond September. They have to just open it up, ease the burden, and so that the students are still eligible for postgrad work permits, etc. But I'm concerned about the disparity, that a lot of Canada has lost their entire work market. Like a lot of people have lost jobs, quite a few thousands. How is that going to play out with our international students that are temporary residents? And is this going to create a side effect where international education is going to become some kind of political hot potato, and saying, who's going to get a job first, Canadians, permanent Canadians, or temporary Canadians? Because we're all Canadians. This is the kind of stuff that concerns me.
I'd like to echo what Faraz said, but I think in the absence of clarity, we're going to keep pushing online education before the students come, because in our minds, we don't see any difference. Our biggest programs are master's programs, thousands and thousands of students online. The only thing they do face-to-face is a practicum before they become a licensed counselor. So if you can do that with a master's degree, you can do it with a bachelor's degree, you can do it with an associate's degree, you can do it with a diploma, and you can do it with language.
That's right.
So the question becomes how we work together to make sure that we recognize what each other is doing and get clarity around it. I like the fact that government is planning ahead. It shouldn't be about the next election or the next debate or the next whatever. We are struggling right now, and we've got to show leadership. And it looks like from what I can gather from being glued to the TV watching this stuff, is that BC is doing a lot of stuff that's leading. Our results are really, really good. And if we work together, I think we can lead this world. And yes, there might be a setback, but we're going to be resilient because we have the tools and the technology and we have experience. Sharon's got 30-something years. I have not quite that. I have close to that. And for us, I'm not sure. And Randall, you, if we put all this stuff together, we have collective wisdom that I think is not being utilized. We're using half of our skills to try to solve this problem and we're waiting. I think we don't wait anymore. As soon as we're done this call, we should start planning for not just September. We need to plan to make this sector more resilient because, as you said in your opening remarks, this sector is more important than everyone realizes. It's not just that number. And I didn't realize until you told me we had 80,000 private sector international students being represented. My group is about 30% of that. I thought we were 5 or 10 or 8 or 17. No one really knows. We need to put more attention on what's working in our sector, where we need support so that we're all in this together. And I think we can support each other to do a better job. So I'm all for it.
Great. And just to clarify, Feroz has got about 60 years of experience.
Yes, Randall, I have lost all my hair in international. It's all that jet setting that I do.
Sharon, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, completely agree with everything that Darren and Feroz have said there. I think that just the added challenge. I think with respect to the pathway and the longer term programs, the online option is going to work, but for language schools, with over half of our business coming for short-term studies, it's going to be very dire without support for schools to be able to survive until students are able to travel.
Okay, we have one question that's come in from Ryan Jarman asking, Darren mentioned moving to a 24/7 model of support. Would he be willing to talk a bit more about how that was done?
It was done really quickly. We had a meeting with the CIO and said you must go 24/7 because our model has changed from 12 to 16 hours on campus to the time zones that we're dealing with and the kind of support that students were asking for. So we went back and looked at all the tickets that are produced on campus for levels 1, 2, and 3 issues. And as you know, lots of things crop up like password resets and I can't do this and I can't upload my assignment and I can't. And so what we did was got proactive and had training groups, we probably hired maybe 30% more staff in IT. And I think if you look at what's happening around the world, everyone is saying this is not novel for IT. This is kind of the kind of world that they live in, remote servicing, customer service support. We hired a customer service specialist because not only do I want you to fix the problem, I want you to document the problem is fixed, and I want you to broadcast that to everybody and how to be proactive in the future. That wasn't being done before. We were just dealing with kind of operational tickets. Solve the problem from one, go to another one, solve it instead of broadcasting the solution. So took about 3 weeks, and it was difficult because while we were transitioning, we still had exams and all the things that you do on campus at the end of a term to get ready for another term with only a 1-week break. So right now, honestly, after 4 weeks, it looks like business as usual, and you went from 12 to 14 hours coverage to almost 24/7, and not much different except better support, better customer service, and students get instantaneous answers to the issues that they're having without having to wait for tickets. It works really, really well. I can probably get more information if there's an actual question about, the technologies that we're using, but to answer part of it, because I'm anticipating, we went from Teams to Zoom. Zoom because all the executives were familiar with Zoom. We've been using it for over a year. Teams is more the academic side. And obviously, there was a lot of training. Like I said, 217 webinars in 3 weeks with over 7,000 people engaged, and it took a month. But if we can do it in a month, that means anybody can do it in a month. So between now and September, there's a lot of time to do the things that we just did in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So I can get more information if you need more, but basically it was a mandated, this is what we're doing to improve technology and student service support to all of our students. And it worked beautifully, beyond our expectations actually so far.
Great, thank you. Another question for all of you. We've in the survey and in a number of conversations have received several comments about the need for greater systemic coordination, maybe from government, from the ministry, from us as your Crown Corporation. You're possibly aware our mandate is to support kindergarten to PhD, public, private, languages, incoming, outgoing, professional development, sort of the big tent picture of international education. So do you have any thoughts, one or two things that we could do, or we could communicate to government about how to better coordinate or how to better support the entire sector in terms of activities, training, and other supports?
Well, I think one of the things that we can learn from abroad, certain jurisdictions like Australia, New Zealand, is that the different peak bodies, like, whether it's Languages Canada or Private Degree or Universities Canada, CICAN, there is absolutely no collaboration between peak bodies here in Canada, and it's been absent for 4.5 years, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. The other thing that I think is that we were hearing from in BC, and I'll be very specific about BC, is that we heard from the K-12 minister quite clearly, but we did not hear from our post-secondary advanced education minister, where there is a lot of conversation about when kids go back to school. Yes, there has been a memo communicated and stuff, but I don't mean to be harsh or critical. I think the more information that's out there for our students, you mentioned 120,000 students here in BC. And those are the sort of the current new numbers, but there's tons of old students, and there is a lot of people affected by this crisis. And I think often we find that international education, it's not a hot topic, though it's a $5 billion sector in British Columbia. It's still not given the priority. And then, when we have the premiers and the leaders sort of talking about there's no international tourism in BC, and for the right reasons, because we want to protect British Columbians, it concerns me because international education is part of that whole remit. If people can't come into our province, how are we to survive? And are we going to start becoming scavengers and start poaching students from local domestic onshore market? And I would not advise that. I think that's probably a very bad idea. So I don't, like I said, I don't mean to be harsh or critical. I just think there was an absence of voice and an engagement for our sector. I still have not seen any collaboration. But I'll tell you one thing: the publics are united. They have a great, voice through CICAN and stuff like that. So if they can be organized, I think the private should be more organized as well.
I'd like to echo that, but I'd like to also work with whoever is interested to break down silos between not just departments, but basically the whole industry. So if you're doing online, fine. If you're doing blended, fine. If you're doing face-to-face, fine. If you have new programs that you want to offer in fields that are going to excel or expand economic development or relationships or trade amongst nations or whatever it is, these people that we're all educating, the younger generation, for the most part, they're probably in their 18 to 24, 25-year range. These are the people that are going to run the economy, the next generation of leaders we want to develop. And there's nothing more important. There's no pollution attached to those people. There's no factories. You don't need 4 years of study to understand the environmental impacts of education. It's a $5 billion sector. We can make it $10 billion with a little cooperation and some technology. It's not new. It's been going on since Aristotle had a one-on-one with a student, probably. We're just doing a little more, ratios of 20 to 1 or 30 to 1 or 40 to 1. And I think this has been around for a long time. This pandemic is serious, but it's not going to improve what we do unless we get the message that we're in this together. It'll be another pandemic some other time, but if we don't learn from this, it won't matter. We won't be around, and the next generation won't be prepared for it. So I'd like to put on the agenda that there's nothing more important than working together right now and break down every silo between every single industry on this, because it impacts every sector of the economy.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, completely agree. Great comments, both of you. I just echo the comment, Randall, in your opening comments, you referred to the ecosystem, and then in the call we've talked about the the importance of language feeding into the rest of the system. And I think it's really important that we have a real complementary approach, so that the different sectors are supporting each other, and then the comments about communication and learning from this are absolutely critical. So I 100% agree. And I think it's important for us to really, as it was mentioned, like we're leading in British Columbia, so taking a look at what role we can play as things develop in across Canada and in other countries as well, because from a language perspective, it's absolutely essential that we have a collaborative approach to ensure that there are strong schools left standing at the end of this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The questions are just pouring in now, and unfortunately, we've only got a few minutes left. Just very briefly, one question. There are a lot of survey results going around about students preferring to defer over going online. What are your thoughts on this? If this is a new normal that's going to be accepted by international students in significant numbers, or are they hedging their bets, deferring rather than going online?
I think that might be true, and our job is to convince the agents that the new normal includes starting online and lowering your costs. If you want to pay commissions to agents, which you must do, you have to pay commissions to agents, and they can make revenue where they're not going to make revenue if it's deferred. So I think this is a mindset that we have to work together to overcome. And if you're struggling with language, you start with language online before you come. It doesn't mean you're finished. Language acquisition doesn't happen in 24 weeks. It actually happens over 24 weeks and then 3 years after the 24 weeks, because we understand that having a 6.0 IELTS does not mean you're ready for graduate school. It actually means you need support when you're in graduate school. And we may have to send people back to our language partners because we're going to have a retention issue if we don't. So I think this is an ongoing struggle that we are going to have to face, and we have to start changing the industry. And part of that is changing the agent mindset about what's the new normal and your role as agents in it. Deferring doesn't solve any problems in my view.
Okay.
Yeah, Brendan, I think I agree with what Darren was saying, but I would sort of also go, because we've got close to 100 plus people listening. We also got to respect the students' choice, and we got to protect them in terms of everyone is hurting financially, socially, emotionally, physically, perhaps. If a student is seeking deferral, empathize with them, because they might have a lot of other factors, not just the fear of studying online. But also, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of PTIB. This is the EQA body that looks to look after us. It's different for degrees, but I would urge caution to any private providers who is deliberately not trying to give students refunds or be genuinely empathetic to their current circumstances. So while deferrals and postponements are up on the rise, I think it's good if we're empathetic to the students' circumstances as well, because everyone's fearful, concerned, and a lot of people, both Canadians and international students, are suffering financially. So
Okay, folks, sorry, Sharon, if you've got an answer, I got to cut you off anyway. We're just down.
No, that's fine. I think that's, I don't have anything further to add. They answered it great.
We're just down to the wire today. Thanks. That's all the time we have. I really want to thank all the panelists for joining us today and taking part of this virtual forum. We have a number of other questions and comments that have come in. We will make sure those are circulated to the panelists and respond to you with their comments and questions. A recording of today's event will also be sent out, and in 1 week we will also have a forum with with some of our public post-secondary leadership in exactly a week. So maybe you'd be interested in joining that session as well. Thank you all very much for joining us. Have a good week.
Thank you, Randall.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much,
Randall.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Sharon. Bye, Faraz. Bye, Randall.
Bye-bye.